Hi, and welcome to the very first episode of the One Lung Lounge. My name is Ashley, and today I have the privilege of talking with Natalie. Natalie was diagnosed with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer in the year 2020. And just last year, she had a double lung transplant. In this episode, we're going to dive into how Natalie became eligible for the transplant and how she prepared for this procedure. So Natalie, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself and share, briefly your diagnosis story with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ashley. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Natalie Brown. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, but currently residing in Chicago at the moment. Like Ashley stated, in 2020, unfortunately, I was diagnosed with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer, and it was diagnosed during the height of the pandemic, which was extremely hard for me from a mental standpoint because no one could go to treatment with me. A lot of my doctor's appointments I had to go to alone. So I'm pretty much used to doing a lot of things on my own just because of how my situation started out. Just to give you a brief overview, I've been on 4 chemotherapies, 1 immunotherapy, 2 clinical trials, and I've had radiation before, but the radiation was for pain, not for the disease. That's a whole nother story, though.
Oh.
And last year, like Ashley stated, I did undergo surgery. I had a bilateral lung transplant at Northwestern, which is why I'm in Chicago.
Oh my goodness, you've gone through a lot of treatment the last 5 years. Can you share what led up to you being eligible for your double lung transplant?
Yeah, so like you said, I have been on a lot of treatments, and basically, I was starting to exhaust all of my resources. I was doing well for a while on these different treatments. I even saw some shrinkage at one point, and then things just started to become stable after a while, and then I just slowly started to experience progression, and it seems like nothing was working. My lungs were getting extremely diseased, so I had cancer in both of my lungs and my lymph nodes. And we were at a point where we kind of were running out of options. We were either going to try to find some more clinical trials or find some more chemos. But my pulmonologist actually said, "Hey, I work with a transplant team at a hospital out of state that has a program where they do double lung transplants on cancer patients. Would you be willing to talk to them?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, anything at this point." So I basically had a consult with one of the surgeons. And he said, basically, in so many words, I'm just gonna say what he said. He said, basically, your lungs are trash. Well, he didn't say this, I'm just saying it. He
Okay.
said, basically, your lungs are trash,
Mm,
and this is pretty much your only hope.
mm,
If you get on another clinical trial or you do chemo again, it's only just buying you time.
um,
Like you basically need this transplant to save your life.
um,
So my oncologist knew nothing about this. Nobody else had heard of this but my pulmonologist. So
wow.
she basically helped to save my life. And it was let me see, July, August, September, October, November. It's basically a 5 month process to go through it because they have to actually make sure that you are qualified. So the process was pretty in-depth.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions, and it like gave me shivers hearing that like you're told this is basically your only option. How,
Yeah.
how did that feel hearing that?
I was very afraid. But basically, I was like, we have to do this. And a part of this was pretty much uprooting your whole life for a year to move to a completely different city. That was a whole another factor within all of this. But my husband's like, we got to do what we got to do. So
Yeah.
that's what we did.
And like you said, you did a lot of this solo at the beginning, so it probably wasn't like as daunting as it maybe would have been for other people because we're used to it, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was like fine going. I mean, I wasn't fine in the beginning, but
Yeah.
obviously over time I was fine going to doctors by myself or people would try to go with me and I'd be like, "No, I'm good. I don't need anybody." And they look at me
Yeah.
like I'm crazy, but it's just what I'm
Yeah.
used to.
Like you build up that resilience, I think, to
Yeah.
yeah, be able to go through that. Wow. And you mentioned it was 5 months. So are you saying from the moment you had that initial meeting, it was 5 months until you had the transplant? That's it?
hmm
It's
Yeah.
5 months.
Yeah. Yeah, it was 5 months. Well, 4 or 5. It started in June and I had the transplant in November. So whatever that is.
Um,
But yeah, it consisted of basically me having a chat with the surgeon. I had to get scans done for them to see like where I was currently because they said we need to get a PET. We need to basically get your whole body because if anything has spread outside of your lungs, you do not qualify.
wow.
That was the number one factor to get this done. Anything, so if it had metastasized outside of this area, then it would have been a no-go. So that's when they discovered, like, hey, you're good. But the tricky part about this is you had to continue to get scans throughout this 4 or 5 month process. And
Mhm.
at any time, if it metastasized outside of the lungs, it was over for you. So I was like shaking the entire time because you know how cancer is.
Uh-huh. And this anxiety of like, I get scanned every 3 months, and that's like I have to prepare for weeks for my scan just mentally.
Yeah.
How were you able to like mentally get through not only the scans, but like the all of the unknowns in that 5 months?
My husband.
Yeah.
I mean, he's probably, I mean, don't get me wrong. My family, my friends are awesome, but my husband is probably the one. He's the reason I probably didn't give up just entirely because I would have just called it a life probably.
Yeah.
So he's the one that helped me get through it, basically.
Oh, how long have you two been married?
It'll be 7 years in
Oh,
2 weeks.
oh my God. Wait, so you all got married like 2 years before your diagnosis. Am I doing the math right?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So I've had yeah, we've been dealing with this for the majority of our marriage.
yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, crazy.
You guys have been through a lot.
Yeah, I was like, sorry, I know you didn't sign up for this.
Oh,
He's like, girl, stop.
you didn't either. So,
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what he says. So
yeah.
yeah.
And is he there with you right now? Like, how often does he visit you?
Ugh, it just depends because I'm not working.
Hmm.
So basically he flies up when he can. So we're like on a rotational system right now. So what happens is once you enter the program, you have to have a caretaker with you for like the first 90 days or so.
Okay.
So I basically, my mom was with me the majority of the time, and then he was here, and then we would rotate, and a friend would fly in. So
Hmm.
basically, we would rotate to make sure I had two caretakers at all times. But right now, since I'm out of that 3 month window, I'm by myself probably 60% of the time
Okay.
until he comes in or my other two best friends come in. And then I have a friend that lives in my building. So
Okay.
she comes down to check on me all the time. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. So I'm curious, like, if we can go back to before those 5 months, like, were you put on a transplant list? Like, and what was
Good question.
any other eligibility requirements outside? A lot of people ask this question, like, how was she eligible? So I'm hearing disease contained in the lungs. Um,
Hmm.
what were there any other eligibility requirements,
Yeah,
basically?
so you also have to be pretty much healthy to a certain extent. So they look at things like your weight. Um, like say for instance, if you're maybe obese or you're something like they might not do it if you're too whatever. So they're looking at your overall general health. Like you have to be healthy with the exception of having lung cancer. That is like a huge thing they look
Wow.
at because
Mhm.
during the testing, I mean, I've never gotten this many tests in my life.
Yeah.
Some tests I had never even heard of. Like before this, I mean, I've had a few swallow tests now, but I had never heard of a swallow test, and I didn't know you had to have a swallow test in order to have a transplant. But to answer your question,
Wait,
I
can you
didn't
explain?
get,
Sorry to interrupt. Can you
yeah.
explain what that is?
Oh
What
yeah,
all of
sorry.
this?
So basically is when they give you different foods or different liquids, and they watch you swallow it through whatever machine it is, because they have to make sure that during surgery, that once you're hooked up and everything, it can go down properly. So I had to like swallow applesauce, apple juice, chew a cracker and swallow it just to make sure everything looked good when it swallowed. I had never had that before, so that was brand new
Yeah,
for me.
yeah, I've never
Yeah.
heard that. Wow. And yeah, so sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh
I'm
no, you're
assuming you
good.
were gonna ask about or answer the transplant list question.
Oh yeah, so I actually didn't. So you can't get put on the transplant list with this I don't know if this is for any transplant, but for their program, you can't get put on the transplant list until you actually moved up here.
Oh,
So I had to actually wait until, so once I got done with all this extensive testing, they meet with the board and then the board comes together to say, hey, based on her test results, we think she's a great candidate. Call her, tell her she's been approved. Once she actually gets to Chicago, then her name gets on the transplant list. So I had to wait till I actually got up here.
oh my
Um,
God.
Literally, I got up here and they told me that they said maybe it might take a month, but at best 2 weeks.
Oh,
Lungs are being transplanted faster these days. So I waited about
huh.
6 days before they called me. And then when they called me, they said that you might have what's called a dry run. So it basically might not be a good fit for you, but you have to come in anyway. So that's what happened to me. They basically said, we have some lungs available, but we don't know if they're going to be a better fit for you or another candidate, but you have to come in anyway. So I went in, had to get checked in, stayed for like 4 or 5 hours, and I had to wait for them to tell me. So basically they came in, oh no, they called me, I'm sorry. They called me and they came in and said, hey, the lungs are a fit for you. Be ready to go in like less than 2 hours. And I'm like, wait, what?
What?
What? What?
No,
Freaking
two
out.
hours? Like
Yeah, I think it was,
the transplant was going to be in 2 hours.
yeah, I think it was actually less than 2 hours because I had started freaking out. Like I thought I was gonna have way more time than that. And then like my husband was on the way. He was at the airport. My mom was just packing up. I mean, like nobody, so my best friend was there with me. She was the only one that was there. Everybody else was trying to get there.
Yeah.
So it was like it was crazy.
Were you informed that like if it was a match, it would be just hours? Were you this?
No, I was not. I was not told that. I
That's
was told, actually, I think I was told that it would be like 5 to 6, and some kind of way it went from 5 to 6 to like 2.
oh my God. So,
Because my husband thought he would be able to make it.
oh, so he wasn't even there before you went in.
No, he didn't make it.
Oh my God. So if I'm understanding, correct me if I'm wrong,
Hmm.
um, you went in for scans for 5 months, like quite often, like more than
Hmm.
anyone else I've ever met, to be
Hmm.
told maybe you'd be eligible, maybe you wouldn't, but you have to move to Chicago
Hmm.
to even get on the list. And even after you move, we may not find a match. You may never even get a transplant. So you uprooted after 5 months to with the possibility that after all of that in the 5 months, you may still not be eligible and have to go back home.
Correct. And the tricky part about that is what I didn't tell you is I was still progressing during this process. So my cancer was still growing. It just had not grown on the outside of the lungs. So
Mhm.
I was on chemo while I was waiting for the transplant. I literally had chemo that Monday and they called me for the transplant that Thursday. So I had to stay on chemo because if I wasn't on chemo, of course, it's going to increase the risk of it going outside of the lungs. So yeah, it was still just growing while I'm going through this whole process. It's still just growing.
I can't imagine what was like going on in your mind. I don't know about you, but I'm always like going to worst case scenario and like having second and third and fourth options for myself. Like if this doesn't work, I have this. And were you doing that? Like planning if you aren't eligible, like what are you going to do? Like what?
Barely. I mean, if I wasn't eligible, I was saying maybe we could do another clinical trial, but I mean, I wasn't thrilled about it because I had already done two and they didn't work.
Yeah.
So, my next option was to try another trial.
Mm-hmm.
But, like he said, I was running out of options. I mean, thank goodness when I first got diagnosed, they did tell me it was extremely slow growing.
Mm-hmm.
So that is kind of probably like what I had, as is on my side. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I didn't really have a whole lot of options. I was thinking maybe another clinical trial. But like I said, wasn't thrilled about it because
Yeah.
the first two didn't happen. So
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
So I want to hear a little bit more about the day of surgery and onward, but I think for now, thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing your story with us. And we will have a part two of this. I so appreciate your time and your vulnerability
Yes,
and like all of the information that you've shared thus far. I so appreciate it. And
of course.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you.